Hello BookTube. Today I would like to talk to you about 4 books that completely floored me or knocked me off my feet for how much I love them, and I'm probably going to rave about them. Out of these 4 books, 2 of them are graphic novels and one is a collection of short stories, and the 4th one is a non-fiction book. 3 of them are really recent. They've been published in the last 2 years, and one of them is From Hell by Alan Moore. That's been, I believe, originally published between 1989 and 1999, and then collected in various formats, but this one is the one I have, and it's a hardcover black and white version. And black and white was the original version because the style of this book is peculiar. So let's start with From Hell. And oh my, this book is probably, I'm really not exaggerating here, the best graphic novel I have ever found and ever read. I just finished it, and I know I'm late to the party because many people know it, many people have already read it. It's a masterwork that has won a lot of accolades, has won 5 Eisner Awards. The Eisner Awards are the most prestigious awards in for the comic industry, and many other awards. Has been a New York Times bestseller. So I'm not talking about a new work here, it's just new for me because before these last days I knew about her, but I never read it. So if you are somebody who enjoys comic books, if you are somebody who enjoys only very few comic books or graphic novel, or if you are somebody who has never read any comic books or graphic novel, if you fall into any of these categories, you should read From Hell, and you're going to realize the incredible potential of the sequential art to medium. In particular, From Hell is a historic book, we could say, a historic novel or historic graphic novel that's been written by Alan Moore, the famous author of Watchmen. And I've also read Watchmen, but this is something else. This is much more artistic and layered and complex and interesting. It's much more interesting. And illustrated by Eddie Campbell, who is also a genius in his own field of design and art, and choosing the style of this gritty, black, very fine, very thin lines to portray Victorian London, Victorian England, with rain that comes down very often in these very fine stripes and lines that Eddie Campbell draws in his panels, was an absolute perfect choice by the authors. Now, on the surface, From Hell is a book about Jack the Ripper. It's about the homicides that took place in the Whitechapel area of London between 1888 and 1891, where the author of Alan Moore really sticks to all the facts that we have about that investigation to a painstaking degree, to the level that in the back of the book there are commentaries by the author on almost every single page about how he thought about how to build the story and how scrupulous he was in really following what we know about the historical facts, and sometimes making something up, but whenever he does make something up, he will honestly say that in the afterword. So that's what the book is from the surface, the, let's say, reconstruction of all the events. And let's keep in mind, this is a 570 pages book, so it's not a light and quick read in any case. And Alan Moore uses a format for the page that he likes very much, and he also used for Watchmen, which is the 9 panels grid. And in 9 panels, you can really insert a lot of dialogue. There are different layers to this book. I would say at the deepest layer, what Alan Moore managed to do is to create a historic landscape where the abuse of women by men has the background of London, but we could say of our Western civilization for the last 2000 years, works really as the leitmotif of Western history. And symbolically, Moore takes the murder of the Queen Boudica 2000 years ago by the Roman Empire, with her tribe, who was an indigenous tribe in Great Britain of back then, as an arbitrary starting point of this historical series of abuses. But it's a perfect framework to paint really the story of a serial killer of women. And not only that, because in between this kind of surface level of the history of the Jack the Ripper murders and this bottom ancient history level that gives some supporting meaning to the entire book, there are two intermediate levels that are equally important. One is maybe more metaphysical, and it's where Alan Moore talks about the dark forces of evil, of occultism, and he draws a map of occultism in London and the history of occultism in London, where a few people, some of whom were the Freemasons, had control over some processes in secret. And that's, of course, something that for a big part Alan Moore makes up. The second element is much more realistic and historical, and that's the social structures in Victorian England, where the genuine respect by Alan Moore, by the author, and by the book, for the poor conditions of these women who were prostitutes, who were just trying to make ends meet in any way possible because of the poverty that was everywhere, was raging everywhere, is really something moving, something touching. And to the point that Alan Moore, in fact, dedicates this book to them. In his dedication, he says, this book is to you and your demise. Of these things alone we are certain. Good night, ladies. As I mentioned, every page is a masterwork in itself. Every page works almost as a finished and complete work in itself. I would say almost every page. This one, for example, page 7, chapter 1, as you can see, has a double panel introduction that moves us into a particular scene on a ferry boat. And then the last panel, we are distancing again from the scene, from the point of view of the seagulls, and we hear the last sentence of the dialogue while we are kind of flying away with the seagulls from the scene itself. It's beautiful, and it's a mini short story in itself. Another perfect example of this is at page 2 and 3 of chapter 2, where most of the panels are actually black, completely dark and black, and we see only the speech bubbles. We can see the person who, in the historical fiction, is believed to be Jack the Ripper, but as a boy, as a young child, with his father. And they are going with a little boat through a dark tunnel, going out in the light, in the port. As you can see, Moore captures a moment of a dialogue that's seemingly simple between the child and his father, where the child is expressing some ambitions and desires of grandeur for himself in a very rational way. He says, "Is it vanity to hope the Lord may choose for me a task most difficult? Only the Lord and I shall know." He wants to do something that is grandiose in his life, but he doesn't care if people won't know about it. And once again, the last panel of this page 3 is a perfect completion and conclusion, almost shocking, because we get the sunlight shining in our eyes of the reader all of a sudden after 17 panels of complete darkness, where the child concludes his monologue and says, "And that shall be sufficient." Another fabulous example here at page 6 and 7 of chapter 2, we have few scenes intertwined, but I'm calling your attention on the last panel at the bottom right of page 6 and the last panel on the next page, page 7. Both of them are showing a hand that is full of blood, and both of them have a deeper meaning of in the entire book. Many people have blood on their hands, physical, literal, but also metaphorical and symbolic blood on their hands. The guilt for these murders and for many other things that happen around the theme of abuse. So showing two different hands belonging to two different characters, both of them with blood on them, has a very strong message for our subconscious while we are reading the book. So the only thing I am sorry about is that I hadn't read this masterwork until now, but it's so incredible. I'm going to go back to it for sure, because the visual ideas, the storytelling ideas in this book would deserve to be studied in school and universities for whomever wants to learn properly fine arts. The second graphic novel I'm presenting is Graffiti Wall, written by Ram V and illustrated by Anand RK. These are Indian artists. I know that Ram V lives in London today, but he grew up in India. And the story of Graffiti Wall has to do with kids living in Mumbai, especially towards the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, the period of time when the author of the book was a kid in India himself. And so there is a lot of autobiographical images and thoughts, ideas, and stories that to our Western eyes are going to look very different, informative about their reality, and at the same time move us because everyone's teenage years are very similar in some respects. The graphic style is an explosion of color. It's perfect to illustrate the reality of Mumbai, so full of things and elements and people. There are people everywhere. It's so crowded, so many cars and traffic and human figures everywhere in every panel. There is this sense of ugliness in the lines used by the illustrator, but that becomes beautiful in the harmony of it all, because the faces of these characters are not really perfect, but in this imperfection, and especially in the harmony of this cacophony, which is the entire symphony of all the elements in these pages, come together really, really well. And we learn about their reality, like for example here at page 22, where the protagonist's father is shown smoking his cigarette in a very unorganized, dirty room. This could be a kitchen or a living room, listening to his radio, a very old radio, drinking some sodas or his beer, and it gives us very quickly in just this central panel, it gives us so much information without even writing anything, without even a line of dialogue. Here at page 27, we see the protagonist looking out from the window of his house down towards the slums where he's living and that are going to be razed. He's sad, of course, at what is going to happen, but look at how busy everything is. Like everything else in Mumbai, how crowded everything is, how close together and full of humanity and objects and elements. I love this example of traffic, where we see this motorbike running through and cutting through the cars in traffic. And once again, page 68 and 69, look at the colors. Look at how bright and colored everything else is. Almost just like a colorful graffiti drawing. And in a sense, I'm sure that the authors wanted to give this type of effect, to convey this type of impression. Page 77 is split in a 9 panels grid. In a very clever way, they've used the actual menu of an Indian style Chinese restaurant, and they've made it into 9 panels. In fact, 6 of them, while 3 become the scene of the story. There is a lot of nostalgia, there is a lot of deep emotions for the dreams of a young boy, of a young teenagers and a group of teenagers. And here on page 116, the narrating voice says, "It's that moment when the gravity of childhood and adolescence pushes and pulls at the core of who you are." In my opinion, this is the universal message of the book. And he continues, "And in that cauldron of emotional violence, you make the choices that decide what kind of grown-up you're going to be. For a little while though, if you time it just right and leap at the moment those forces cancel each other out, you can float. You can be weightless." It's so beautiful. It's lyrical. It's a great poem about adolescence. Graffiti Wall. Wonderful, wonderful, intelligent, original graphic novel. I recommend it to absolutely anyone. The next book I want to talk to you about today is this one, Dream State, California in the Movies. If you like movies, if you like cinema, but especially if you love cinema, this is going to be a very interesting book for you, because it's written by Mick, who is the film critic for the San Francisco Chronicle, and he's the author of 3 previous books. But he has a really great style. He is able to pack a lot of power in very short sentences, and writes in a way that reminds me a little bit of DeLillo of White Noise. Paragraphs, or even sometimes single sentences that work like they're so witty and powerful that they work by themselves, in themselves. The blurb says, "An eminent film critic reveals the dark side of the sunny California dream." In reality, the author does not focus only on the dark side, but the fact is that California has a huge dark side that, if you look at it with the necessary open eyes and transparency, you have to see it, you have to report it. It hardly needs to be argued. Nothing has contributed more to the mythology of California than the movies. So the Golden State is really the protagonist of this non-fiction book. Mick LaSalle has divided the book in different chapters by thematically, but always making examples of movies, and not only recent movies, but he draws from an experience with and a knowledge of movies that is encyclopedic. So he goes back to the very first black and white movies, and some of them I have to confess I didn't even know. I fell in love with this book immediately when LaSalle talks about The Wizard of Oz, the original black and white and color Wizard of Oz. He makes the strong case that The Wizard of Oz is in fact a movie about Hollywood, is secretly a movie about Hollywood, consciously or unconsciously by whoever produced it. He says there are many aspects of the movie that tell us that the real center of this work is Hollywood. Why is that? Well, first of all, there is this sense of reality that is black and white, and the magical world of Oz that is in color. And so we have 2 different realities that Dorothy, the protagonist, can choose from. The colorful world of Oz, where that is full of dangers, and she risks her life many times. And as we all know, the movie ends with the famous sentence, "There is no place like home." So home is supposed to be the quiet and comforting place. Only Mick LaSalle reminds us that is not the case at all, because for Dorothy at home, there are even bigger troubles brewing and expecting her. For example, the fact that there is a woman who wants to kill her dog, and she has the sheriff of the town supporting her, that subplot is never realized, is never fully, let's say, completed or explained by the end of the movie. Therefore, if we really think about it, if we really watch it carefully, we realize that when Dorothy says at the end of the movie, "There's no place like home," she's happy with her little dog, she will wake up the day after with the sheriff taking away her dog to be killed. So LaSalle says, home is horrible for this reason. Oz is horrible too, but at least Oz is in color, at least it's exciting. And this is the core message, subliminal message, that he thinks that the movie is giving us. Not only the movie, but Hollywood in itself. In other words, it's impossible to know for sure if this was the intentional message of The Wizard of Oz, or if it's simply a product of a film culture that believed so little in home and so much in Hollywood and in the life of imagination that it just couldn't fake it, so it came out subconsciously. The true and obvious message of The Wizard of Oz has been hiding there in plain sight for more than 8 decades. Hollywood is merciless, awful, and dangerous, but it's way better than home. The fourth book that I'd like to talk to you about today and that floored me is this collection of short stories called Great Escapes from Detroit by Joseph O'Malley. Joseph O'Malley also has a booktube channel, YouTube channel, where in his disguise as a 2-title track, he talks about poetry and Shakespeare in particular, and it's a really fascinating channel that I'm subscribed to and I follow every time that I can. But the book includes 8 short stories. All of them are pretty much based in Detroit or the Detroit area. And like the blurb in the back cover says, the blurb is by Lee Martin, Pulitzer Prize finalist. The stories in Great Escapes from Detroit are luminous with what lesser writers miss. The magic and the splendor of the commonplace come alive. Which is true. I feel after reading the book, I have been presented with seemingly very normal and very daily situations that come alive in a very electric way. As a reader of fiction, I love it when there is a very high tension. Tension doesn't mean necessarily conflict, but electricity. When the paragraph, the page has a high electricity, as a reader, I come alive. I enjoy it. I love it. And every single page of Great Escapes from Detroit, I don't know how, but it's full of electricity, of this tension. And what I mean by electricity is, and tension, is something that pulls you in for reasons that might be sometimes subjective and personal. This is why fiction is not the same for everybody. But these stories spoke to me in a very, very personal way. In one respect, because the narrating voice in every story is a voice that has incredible observation skills. I think the author really has a genius for observation of especially human relationships. And so you have little details in the body posture or the inflection or tone, or how somebody is speaking a particular word that in what would be a completely normal situation and scene flips it upside down and gives it a completely different meaning, surprising you, shocking you sometimes, or moving you. So I don't want to ramble too much about it because it's I find it difficult to articulate my thoughts better than this about these short stories, but each of them has a different flavor, pulled me in a very vital way, in a very energetic way, and I wish all of you could read them. It's overall a 235 pages book with 8 short stories. I would love to hear what you think about it, and if you agree or disagree, that would be a fantastic discussion to have and a dialogue to have, because everyone who reads it must converse about it. Thank you very much for watching this video. Bye.